Former Reserve Bank Governor Tito Mboweni, former President Thabo Mbeki says the late Tito Mboweni's legacy lies in his tireless fight against injustice and his unparalleled contributions towards the making of policy. Through his foundation, Mbeki's joined millions of people across the country and around the world in paying tribute to Mboweni, who passed away over the weekend at the age of 65. He was the first black Reserve Bank governor and was in that position for 10 years while Mbeki was president. Newzroom Afrika senior political reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo joins us now live with the former president in Houghton, Johannesburg. Ziyanda, good afternoon to you. Thabo Mbeki is an important person to hear from in this moment.
Absolutely, Stephen. Someone who would have worked with him very closely, not just in the first democratic dispensation, but of course in the apartheid struggle, I should say. And let's bring in former President Thabo Mbeki to talk to us about the life of Tito Mboweni. Your statement also reflected then about his contributions to economic reform in this country, serving, of course, as the first Labour Minister and then 10 years as the Reserve Bank. Your initial reaction to the news of his passing, as it came as a shock to many of us as South Africans?
Indeed, it was really a very, very big shock because at least I was not warned even that he was ill. So the only news the first news I had was that he had passed away. And as you know, Tito was young, at 65, and there had been no report. I never received any report that he was unwell. So the news that he had passed away, it really came as a big shock and very, in a sense, destabilizing. Because he's an important person for us. He remained an important player in terms of what we want to make of South Africa. It really was a shock.
And not just about what he could contribute in South Africa, but also on the continent as well. We'll talk a bit about that AU Peace Fund. But I want to go back then to the times when you were part of and parcel together with Tito Mboweni to write the ANC's policy document, Ready to Govern, for an example, to help assist the ANC in ushering our new democracy.
Yes, Tito, well, let me say, two of the important the ANC policy documents as we led up to the elections in 1994 were the document Ready to Govern and the document Reconstruction and Development Program. They were very, very important policy documents. Actually, even if you look at them today, they remain very important policy documents as to what needs to be done. And Tito, young as he was, played a very important part in the conceptualization of those documents and in what they said. Practically, you'd remember he was deputy chair of our electoral ANC. Economic Transformation Committee. And the reason he was put there is because of his very active. My description of Tito is that Tito was a revolutionary change agent. He saw himself as that and he acted like that.
Yeah.
And here we were faced with a situation of having to decide that here there's going to be a very big economic challenge. Part of the transformation would be post-apartheid transformation would have to address the economy. What do we do? So he made a very important contribution in terms of both of those documents. And indeed, I think, I know that his activities in that economic sphere were an important part in deciding for Nelson Mandela to decide that would be our first Minister of Labour.
Yes.
And specifically Labour. Specifically Labour because it was quite clear that one of the things that would have to change are the conditions for the workers of our country. the right to strike, the right to collective bargaining and safety and so on. That you needed somebody like Tito, a trained economist, but as I was saying that really a revolutionary change agent, that you had to change the conditions radically.
Yes.
In order to be able to create these conditions, so that you had a labor relations regime in the country, which would be what the movement had been fighting for.
Yes.
The reason that the South African Congress of Trade Unions was affiliated to the Congress movement, the reason that COSATU became part of that broad movement, was because the trade unionists were saying they knew that in order to realize those normal trade union rights, you needed a changed political situation. So they couldn't avoid involving themselves in the political struggle, so that the political victory must then translate into their gaining these normal trade union rights. And then that's why really Nelson Mandela put Tito there as the first Minister of Labour, to deal with this whole big area.
Yes.
Of new labor relations. And I think he did, as minister, did very, very well. Even the structures we still have today, like NEDLAC and then all of this, these are part of the processes that were led by Tito Mboweni.
And then, of course, he was moved then in 1998 to almost in a senior management role within the Reserve Bank to take over from Dr. Chris Stals. What was the thinking at the time, former President, in terms of moving him from Labour? He was doing really well, and actually taking him to the Reserve Bank with all the economic changes that needed to take place of that time?
Well, you know that the whole area of, let me say, the Reserve Bank, and therefore monetary policy, we had left in the hands of Christans, people we inherited from the apartheid regime. It didn't do anything wrong, as far as we knew. But clearly we felt that in the area of monetary policy, and therefore the leadership of the Reserve Bank, it was necessary to put in somebody. So even Cristals himself asked for it, actually, to say that he thought that, the transition period had been long enough, and that we needed to put somebody else other than him, because he was a relic from the old order.
Yes.
So we also felt the same, that it was time that we moved. You remember Tito was put in as deputy governor of the Reserve Bank in 1998. Yes. And the reason it was put like that is because the law required that the person who was appointed as governor of the Reserve Bank had to have banking experience. It's in the law.
Yes.
So Tito had to be put in there. He had no banking experience. He had to be put in there as deputy to Steve Christans for a year, so that indeed by 1999 he had banking experience.
Yes.
So he could be appointed. No, we wanted to, I'm saying even Christals himself raised the matter. We wanted to put in somebody not from the old order. And again, you see, because we are talking here about Tito Mboweni, and it's a very major job, because now you are responsible for monetary policy, that the best person to put there, who would not be afraid of any risks that had to be taken, any challenges to be met, that he was the kind of person who would fit that kind of role. So that's why we took him out of the Ministry of Labour into the central banking. It also is very important because he's a chief of the Central Bank of South Africa, the Reserve Bank.
Yes.
But that also puts you as part of one member of the whole collective of central bank governors. So it became part of that whole group. It's an institutional body. So it became, again, we thought he had enough courage and, you know, with sufficient principle to be able to walk into that body with all of the other central bank governors of the world. Yes. To discuss global monetary issues. And indeed, I think it did very, very well, even in that area.
And I think his courage, sometimes his stubbornness, you know, not afraid to go against the grain type of character has been reflected upon over the last couple of days. And in fact, you know, what I'd like you to reflect on is now when you are president and that era of the 3 TMs, Thabo Mbeki, Trevor Manuel, Tito Mboweni, how you managed sometimes the clashes between the two ministers, because they had very strong personalities, Tito Mboweni and Trevor Manuel, and also, you know, the kind of leadership that's needed to be able to manage that kind of situation.
Sure, I mean, there were, I think all of the ministers, that kind of generation of ministers, all of them, were people who were convinced. First of all, they were convinced about the need for revolutionary change.
Yes.
The very loyal, very adherents of ANC policy, and ensuring the need to make sure that those policies are implemented. But indeed, quite correct, they had independent-minded people, but they were not ill-disciplined. So, I mean, we would have, they would have differences, which we would debate, and in the end, what would prevail is, in terms of where we're trying to get to, what's the correct thing.
Yes.
I'll give you an example, which is, it relates to Trevor Manuel, not Tito. A big dispute at some point between the Minister of Finance, Trevor Manuel, and the Minister of Public Enterprises, Mboweni.
Yes.
It had to do with building a fiber optic cable along the West Coast to improve the communication system. And the government had the money, we had the money to do it. So the debate was, the Minister of Finance was saying quite correctly, you see these budget surpluses we have, we need to keep them in order to prepare for a rainy day, so that when a rainy day comes, like 2008, we've got these resources to support the economy. And Mboweni was saying, but there are urgent tasks of investment that need to be made. Like we raised this thing about the need to improve the communications. So what do? So they couldn't agree. So in the end, the cabinet said I must adjudicate the matter.
Yes.
So I met with the two ministers and discussed with them and make submissions. And then I said, I've listened to both of you, but I'll make a ruling, which must be consistent with what the movement wants to achieve. So made a ruling. I wouldn't tell you which side I took. And both ministers, no, we took the decision that was necessary to invest in that fiber optic cable. That investment did take place. Mm. So I'm saying that you'd have differences of that kind.
Yes.
But it was not really that difficult to resolve them, because all of these ministers were tied to a common understanding. As a movement, there's somewhere we want to get to. Debate is how do we get, what's the quickest way to get to one thing and the most consistent and with policy and all that. So even with regard to Tito and as governor of the Reserve Bank for monetary policy, with the requirement to liaise correctly with finance and then fiscal policy and so on, whatever differences arose, it was not that difficult to resolve them. But it is true that both ministers, of course, would have their own very firm views and the courage to state their own views and stand by what they say. But I think I'm saying that given that they were both of them committed to a common perspective, in the end, it was not that difficult to solve such differences as arose between them.
But what was difficult was the 2008 global financial crisis. You were still president at the time, and Tito Mboweni was still Reserve Bank governor. As president, and having to now deal with pressure coming from all corners. You are criticized harshly for your neoliberal policies, and workers on the one side are also, putting their fight forward. What kind of character did Tito Mboweni show during that moment that you believe should be remembered by those who are going to follow in his footsteps?
You see, unfortunately, I think that you see, I left
Yes.
government in September 2008. So didn't have enough time to respond to that global financial crisis. Tito left the following year, 2009. Same problem. I think that, you see, my view is that we had better capacity to respond to that crisis than many other countries. The reason for it is because we had these budget surpluses. It's the issue that I was raising, which was raised by Trevor Manuel.
Yes.
That once you have those surpluses, they are very important when the economy, the world economy, domestic economy goes down. You've got the resources in order to build up the economy. Now, I don't want to comment on this, whether the government that was formed in 2009 did indeed respond to the way that it should have. There was a global economic crisis which impacted on us here.
Yes.
Did we respond? Did we have a plan to say, given that we've got these extra governmental responses, fiscal resources, this is how we must utilize them in order to counter this? So I'm saying that by the time I left government, it was too early. The crisis in 2008, but the results, the negative results of the banking crisis, which started in America, we showed quite late in 2008. So it was really the government formed in 2009 that had the challenge to respond to this. But I think by this time, both Tito and myself were not there.
And you left in 2008, and he left in 2009. Here we had other interests, business interests, and I think you've remarked even in your statement, you've described it as a personal sacrifice that he made now to make that return in 2018. The political environment is completely different. In fact, Tito Mboweni is one of those who characterized the period where he wasn't in the government as 9 wasted years. What made you use those words, personal sacrifice, in terms of that characterization? Because it almost implies that he had to stop what he's doing, but there was a crisis that he needed to attend to between 2018 and 2021.
Well, when President Ramaphosa approached him to become Minister of Finance, he called me, Tito, to say that there's this request that had been made. What did I think? So I said, well, I think if the president wants you to do this, it'll be challenging. I think you should do it. You've got sufficient experience in the area to be able to do it. He was very, very reluctant, extremely reluctant to do it.
Why do you think that was the case?
Partly because he was saying that, why are you recycling old material? There are younger people who can be brought into this thing and so on. Now you dig up people like him who had left the public service long before. He didn't think it was quite right to do that. And wasn't quite certain that he would be able to work as effectively with this team that would have to work of ministers as had been the case in the past. He really was very reluctant. Even he then took out the job ultimately. But even as he was there, I remember at least once he called me to say, look, I want to leave, and I had to say, you can't leave. It was a departure from what he had been doing since he left government, since he left the Reserve Bank. In a personal sacrifice in that sense. I mean, he was enjoying himself in the private sector, and we were regularly engaged with him to say there are also these transformation challenges in the private sector. It's not just a matter of being chairing this board and chairing that board and getting whatever money. What do we do in the context of this transformation of the economy as a whole? So it's a discussion we're having with him in his role in the private sector. And he was very prepared for that kind of challenge.
Yeah.
And to be dragged back to government, he really was quite unhappy about it. A personal sacrifice in that sense. In the sense that it took him away from a challenge where he thought he could actually be quite effective in terms of helping to bring about the changes in the private sector that were required.
Yeah. You know, I've listened to you speak over the last couple of minutes, and two things stand out, especially if you do sort of a comparative analysis. One is the discipline of the ministers of the time when you were president, but also how young Tito Mboweni was in all these roles. He was 34 when he was Labour Minister, 39 as Reserve Bank Governor, and I know that within the ANC there's this talk of a generational mix, but it was there, you know, during your time. But it would seem, as you've consistently raised, the caliber of ANC members is not quite the same. I mean, just today, if I might just let you know, President, you have two ANC members who were in spokesperson capacity roles, Zizi Goto and Pulemabe, appearing in court. What is to be said about that when we now look at the life of Tito Mboweni and then we look at the so-called young people in the movement right now?
Well, I think one advantage that we had when you talk about people like Tito Mboweni and so on, these are people who are coming directly out of the struggle to defeat the apartheid regime. You see, there was always a danger if you are during those years. You could get killed, you get arrested, you're sentenced to life, and they kill you in police cells or something. There was a high price to be paid for being involved in the struggle. It impacted on the quality of the ANC member, who then, for instance, becomes a member of parliament in 1994. It's people who came out of that struggle. And therefore, this is not careerists. These are not people who are there for opportunistic reasons. Because I'm saying there's a price to pay for being a member, whether you were in exile or inside the country, whatever you were. So the caliber of the person like Tito, the person who then participates in the formulation of the Reconstruction and Development Program that are ready to govern, are people who are coming directly out of the struggle. And the struggle itself has created the kind of person who is not interested in self-promotion or anything like that, but really genuinely interested in revolutionary change, as I was saying. So that's kind of person. But I think what has happened since is a matter that we've raised in the ANC is that after that, see, even once the ANC became the governing party, part of what happened is that you then got people getting into the movement who understood that, you become a member of the ANC, and that gives you access to government job, and that gives you access to public resources. So the ANC has been raising this thing for a long time.
Yeah.
And hence this demand about the ANC renewal, and I hope we're going to act on it now. Because over the years we have accumulated all sorts of people. Post-94, when you become a member of the ANC, there's no threat of arrest or persecution or anything. Rather, there's a promise of a good job and, and good salary and all that. And so you do get people who then get into the movement and into senior positions who in reality, in spirit, in spirit and in terms of their value system are not really ANC.
And President, just as we wrap up now, in terms of now when you look at race relations in our country, which is something that also Tito Mboweni was quite frank about, I know you invited to Pretoria Girls High after that incident with the WhatsApp group and the pupils, and I've managed to get my hands on that report, and what you've said is, you know, the manner in which that particular case was handled, in some aspects, you know, it may have not necessarily be linked to race in terms of the actual text in that WhatsApp. What's to be said about race relations now that it's 30 years into democracy and our schools and the transformation there and the ability to deal with such issues as we remember Tito Mboweni?
Yes, I think no, you are quite right. No, Tito. I mean, Tito, as I was saying, this Tito as people who are coming out of the struggle.
Yeah.
So when you say non-racialism or non-sexism to him, instinctively they know what that means. So when they see racism, they would respond very negatively to it. Let's deal with it.
Yes.
In the particular case that we are dealing with, I think that I'm not sure about this, but I'm quite certain that we need to have, as part of the school syllabus, in the school syllabus, you must have a process by which you educate the young at school, at primary school, to be non-racial, non-sexist in their attitude. Whether that is there in the syllabus, I don't know. So that you see, you get our schools, you talk about the Pretoria High School for Girls. That Pretoria High School for Girls is 85% black children and 15% white. So it's changed. This was the Model C schools. Completely white and all that, but they've changed. And as you get the mixed black and white children, it's inevitable that we're coming out of apartheid, the apartheid system not long ago. It's inevitable that these children will pick up this kind of sentiments even from their parents.
Yes.
So you need a process in the school system so that you bring up these children in a manner that is, as the Constitution says, a non-racial South Africa and non-sexist South Africa. I don't know whether that is there in the syllabus, but it ought to be there. Even in the training of the teachers, in the teacher training colleges, like at UNISA trains a lot of teachers. UNISA needs to have a system by which you train the educator to be an educator against racism. So that when they get to school, the teachers, they play that kind of role of bringing up these children who have these values of non-racism and non-sexism. And I think I saw this complaint about the Pretoria High School for Girls. The other day I saw that there's a similar complaint about the Queenstown High School for Girls.
Yes.
About racism and in this case also sexual harassment, but also racism. We've got to deal with it in a comprehensive manner. Not as incident in school by school in an ad hoc manner. I'm sure as a Democrat, I'm not sure what we did about this. But we need to integrate it into the school syllabus so that the children are brought up to understand these value systems which are in the Constitution, a non-racial and a non-sexist South Africa. And I'm quite sure Tito would agree entirely with me on this one.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's former President Thabo Mbeki reflecting on the life of Tito Mboweni and the legacy that he leaves behind.